And I think that is the difference this cycle will expose. And so it's very important that everybody understands that this is not just a fuel crisis, it's also a decision speed crisis. And I think that is important to realize. And that's also outside help is available.
Welcome to the Stratos 12 commentary on current issues. The big issue, as we've addressed previously in our last podcast, was the Gulf crisis and the effect on global aviation and the true globalization of the crisis itself. Remco Althuis, a partner in Stratos 12, and me, Barry Eustance, also a partner in Stratos 12, going to walk you through a free-ranging conversation about the impacts, the effects, what can be done to support airlines who are suffering the distress of this Gulf crisis. So Remco, starting from the top really, where are we? What's actually changed since we last spoke and generally geopolitically?
It's, I think, now clear that the conflict in Iran is no longer a regional issue for aviation. It is basically affecting aviation worldwide due to the shortage of fuel and the increase on the fuel price. And basically, fuel is doubled in price since a year ago. It varies a bit across the regions. It's slightly less expensive in North America than it is, for instance, in Asia Pacific, where it's actually more than doubled to 7%, 107% increase, so compared to a year ago. But overall, clearly, the constraints in the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that there's less Jet A1 fuel being shipped around the world is causing tremendous issues for airlines. And what you see, it is now affecting their networks, so their routings. It is impacting consumer confidence because fuel at the pump is also more expensive. So people are postponing the more expensive decisions on things that they want to buy and purchase, including holidays. And so that means that it is impacting airline demand and therefore also airline decision-making at the highest level. What we are seeing is clearly a shift away from demand-led recovery into a cost and network-constrained industry. And you see examples of that. Lufthansa had a very bad week with the strikes they've had and now decided to potentially cut 20,000 flights out of their network for later this year because they want to save, it would save up to 40,000 tons of fuel. And other airlines are taking similar decisions, looking at how they can reduce their cost, particularly on short-haul routes, because for the European-based hub carriers, their short-haul routes are often feeding their long-haul networks. They have limited pricing power and face low-cost competition, and therefore say, well, maybe we should look at this network again and see how we can rationalize it in order to save cost.
And we're seeing the reported last vessel to have left the Gulf with aviation fuel, jet fuel on board, arrived in the UK very recently. We understand that discussions are in place and consideration is being given to sourcing alternatively other than from the Gulf, for example, Nigeria. But it's a major issue, isn't it? We've got a massive capacity constraint now caused by the Hormuz crisis and the restrictions through Hormuz. And it's affecting the entire supply chain, isn't it? I mean, it's not just aviation fuel. The whole effect on consumer confidence and consumer discretionary income, which goes back to, I think, a conversation we had a long time ago about the importance of consumer discretionary income and on airline revenues.
Absolutely. And so we see that jet fuel prices have risen sharply. So the supply risk is now emerging, particularly in Europe. So there's already countries that have issued warnings. There's an EU meeting taking place to see how these EU governments can mitigate the impact of the higher costs for all of their consumers across the board. Obviously, then there's also for aviation the network impact. We already faced airspace disruptions across the Middle East. That means that airlines have to reroute at scale, so they can't fly the most optimal routes. They have to fly around either on the northern side or the southern side of the Arabian Peninsula. Longer flight times, higher fuel burn, crew complexity, and reduced aircraft productivity. That means that they can't fly all of the routes that they wanted to fly because the aircraft are being utilized more. So it's just not a cost increase, it's also a structural disruption on how airline networks function. Given the uncertainty of some of these network options, obviously consumers, even if they want to go on a holiday, are reconsidering where to fly to. And so there's also a massive impact on countries that rely heavily on tourism, like Thailand, for instance, where a lot of the traffic is routed through the Middle East. And it will impact those economies also on the income side because less people will travel there.
And for national economies, particularly some of the island economies that are so heavily dependent upon tourism, not only in the Mediterranean, but also further afield in the Indian Ocean. I'm thinking about the Maldives and other communities where the infrastructure is so heavily geared towards tourism flows, but also supply chain flows through the aviation sector. It's going to be a very, very difficult geopolitical situation to navigate. The large airlines have big structural planning departments and resilience planning. For the smaller operators, this is going to be very difficult to manage, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because I mean, airlines need to respond to this, obviously. And so what they will try to do is discipline capacity. So we're already seeing flight cancellations, frequency reductions in Europe, as I said earlier. But obviously the smaller airlines, particularly when they are state-owned airlines that need to connect their countries to the outside world, and they're now faced with an overhaul of their network plan and see how they can mitigate the lack of connectivity that they're faced with, because some of the established carriers have reduced flying to their destination. So they're on the receiving end of this connectivity crisis, and they have to now see how they can increase or flying, open new routes to markets that they need for their tourism industry. So yeah, that's absolutely massive undertaking.
Interesting also that Mohammed Al-Arian, notable economist and former leadership team member at PIMCO, was talking recently about the ramping up of supply post-crisis. And it's going to be a slow process. And I think airlines and governments are going to have to wake up to the fact that this is not going to be a matter of flicking a switch and the supply flows. If you've got 800 vessels stuck in the Gulf at the moment, bursting with fuel to be transported, if those start to leave, question one, are the owners going to bring them back? What will be the geopolitical situations that will allow that? What will insurers demand? What will be the cost of transit? Are you going to take that risk? And also the mechanism of oil production requires pretty well constant flow. Bringing that back up and spooling that back up is going to be a pretty sizable operation and involve considerable time delay, which is going to impact upon an industry where margins are wafer thin right across the board, with very often very, very squeezed balance sheets, even pre-crisis. So how can we as an industry mitigate against that? What's the options for airlines, particularly the smaller airlines, to manage their way through that kind of and lead their way through that kind of dynamic?
Well, I think they need to have a conversation with their shareholders and say, okay, why are we in business? What is our task? How can we help with the assets that we have? And then take decisions very quickly on where they utilize their assets, what routes they need that can help the inbound tourism flow, as well as basically the supply chain. So meaning bringing in the necessary goods by air into the countries. Because, you're right, this is going to take a while for it to rebalance again. We have seen that once basically the aviation industry slows down because of outside factors, as it did during COVID, and when assets are parked and staff expertise are being let go, then it takes a while for it to build it up again. And we're not fully there yet. I mean, it is uncertain. And it's going to take a while. So contrary to the optimism that comes out of the White House, I think this is not going to, we're not going to see prices drop overnight for the reasons that you pointed out. Because, I mean, the ships need to leave, drop off their load, and then come back. And at the same time, of course, since the storage capacity in of these oil producing countries is limited, they're going to have to restart production again.
Yeah.
And
And
then, of
that's
course,
that, as we said, is a slow process. It's not just flicking a switch. The question here is, of course, you're a small airline with a small team, but you haven't seen something like this before, or maybe you did in COVID. What are the lessons from COVID that can be carried forward? From my background from change and transformation is that you widen the circle of excellence and expertise to deal with these kind of issues. You create the strategic vision. You have a guiding coalition of people who are going to motivate and focus on it. You have a sponsoring executives who's going to really focus on the issue. But then you open it up to the wider stakeholder community and seek the best input and advice you can, because the process brings the people from the front line into the ownership of the business, rather than being disincentivized by being furloughed or pushed out the business with no say in the matter. Everybody's in the same boat, and with a stake in it from an emotional ownership perspective. And I think that's something that I've certainly seen a paucity of in the airline industry, where there is a reluctance to widen that circle of excellence and intellect to overcome problems. And is that something that you've experienced as well? You've seen some organizations that need turning around, Remco. What's your experience?
well, I think in this case, time is not on your side, right? So you need to take decisions quickly. Or when it comes to basically restoring supply chains, see if you can file new destinations very quickly, just to kind of ad hoc pick up stuff for the country, in the case of what we had to do during COVID, when critical supply chains were cut. So take these decisions quickly, and also on launching new markets, you have to try something. If it doesn't work, try something again.
Yeah, and build, measure, learn, pivot. Build, measure, learn, pivot, because the roadmap doesn't necessarily exist for this sort of thing, and certainly widening the circle of input and expertise is a smart thing to do in these environments. Every client that you speak to in these sort of situations would always benefit from speaking to us earlier, sooner, when we can get ahead of it, ahead of the game with them and for them. Very often organizations, and in fact supervisory boards and oversight boards, leave it too late when you're now dealing with a compounded crisis. And it's the same flying an airplane, really. Do you step on a problem early, or do you leave it until it's kind of quietly spiraling out of control? And the answer is get to it early. And I guess, would it be fair that would be our advice to any operator, but not least the small operators? It's getting there early, isn't it, Remco? Is exactly what you said.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not primarily an operational challenge. Of course, it is an operational challenge in the sense that you have to repivot your strategy and then implement that operationally. But this is very much an executive decision challenge, because the speed at which decisions now need to be made on your network, on fuel purchase, on pricing adjustments, and also on your cash flow management is much faster than the traditional airline planning cycle. And obviously, if you leave it at the slower pace cycle, that creates a massive risk, because these decisions that you need to make, and the delay in these decisions will destroy margin very, very quickly in this environment, because it's
and cash flow.
cash flow. Yeah. So if you start something and you open a new route, but you're late in taking the necessary commercial actions to ensure that the loads come in, or you need some work on your distribution, then obviously before you know it, your launch date is there and the loads aren't healthy enough for it to be sustainable. So it's very important that these decisions are taken very quickly. And also, if you don't have the expertise, that you, like you said, widen your network and ask for outside opinion and outside help.
Absolutely. And certainly we've historically talked to airlines in terms of be very cautious about who you lay off and under what terms, because when it comes to the recovery cycle and actually needing then to generate the margin, generate the revenues. If you can't do that because of payroll constraints, i.e. you don't have the experienced people back on the payroll in place, fully certified, back up with all their sim checks in the case of pilots, all their SEP checks in the case of crew, that the operations team, the IOCC team are fully up to speed, then you are further constraining your cash flow recovery. So there are some very careful considerations to be put, not the standard knee-jerk, let's lay people off. There are better ways of doing it, but they need to be taken at the local level so that the local understanding and the local laws and the local cultural considerations are taken into account. So yeah, small operators, it's going to be a very tough time. So our advice is get out there, take advice externally. And do it quickly.
And because, what airlines need right now is not more analysis, right? They need structured, rapid decision support at the executive and board level. And the focus is very clear, which routes remain viable, how to price in a volatile market, how to manage your fuel exposure, how to protect liquidity, and also how to sequence decisions under pressure. So, like you said, plan, do, check, act, try something, and then if it doesn't work, pivot to something very, very quickly. And I think the decision cycle is kind of now not over months, but in days and weeks, because that's how volatile the situation is.
Yeah. Well, what we are able to do at Stratos 12, for those of you who are listening who feel that this is a discussion that you'd like to extend, this kind of executive decision acceleration is something that can be provided very rapidly and remotely. It's not only a rapid process, but also the costs of moving in country and so forth are eliminated, because you can start getting the answers in conference calls and group thinking sessions immediately. If that's something that's of interest, give us a call. Would be delighted to chat without any further commitment. Just happy to chat and walk you through what can be done, what our thoughts are. Remco, to conclude, what would your thoughts be in this direction?
Well, I think the executive decision accelerator is designed to compress the decision cycle. And so this conflict is forcing airlines into faster, higher stakes decisions than most are structurally set up to make. Aviation, cash is king, and cash can run out of the building very, very quickly. So that means that airlines that move early and decisively will protect their margin and position, and those that do not will be reacting to outcomes rather than shaping them. And I think that is the difference this cycle will expose. And so it's very important that everybody understands that this is not just a fuel crisis, it's also a decision speed crisis. And I think that is important to realize. And that's also outside help is available if it becomes too much, because these management boards are under tremendous pressure, and they are confronted with situations that they may not have seen before, at least not in this way. And there's clearly outside help available if they want to have the conversation with us.
Perfect. And just to give you a little bit of background, Remco's experience is as airline CEO and significant experience with joint ventures, fluent Mandarin speaker, and Richard Nanton, who's been the VP flight operations for a very large carrier, and also director of flight operations for another very large airline operator, and also chief pilot, chief training captain. I've got very strong industrial experience, but also operational experience, having flown long haul for a very long period of time. Jean-Marc Yukana Isha, one of our other partners, is a specialist in MRO and asset management. So if you feel that our collective experience may be of value to you, just give us a call. We'll put the contact details on the screen, and we're happy to have a completely open discussion with you about how we might be able to help. So from Remco and from me and the Stratos 12 partnership, we look forward to speaking to you very, very soon. Thank you.